If there is one thing I have learned from spending nearly all of my game time perfecting the Scout, slowly developing my own playstyle and tricks, it's that Scout is a perfect example of an easy to learn, hard to master class. By this I mean that the skill floor required to play Scout is very low, but in order to get the most out of his kit, you need a lot of experience. This is because Scout's utility kit is extremely versatile, meaning that any problem that presents itself, Scout usually has an answer for it. What makes someone a master of Scout is the ability to recognize these problems and figure out a solution to solve them. This is how to master Scout. Being the most popular class, it's fairly common to see new players coming in with the burning question of how to scout, usually being provided with the 3 holy rules of mining minerals, lighting up the cave, and killing HVTs. While this is true to the role of the scout, and is a great starting point for anyone who is absolutely clueless on what they should be doing, it is an oversimplified version of the role. A lot of people end up taking these rules at face value without really understanding what they mean. In fact, this guide is mainly for those of you who have at least some experience as Scout players, as I will be skipping over the very basics and instead focusing on practical situations where you need to know how to act instead of what kind of weapons you have available. First, Scout has the most solo potential out of any class. You can get into situations that you really shouldn't be surviving from alone, and with the proper use of your kit, you can tremendously speed up a mission. However, it is very difficult to become completely self-sufficient because you are lacking on firepower, and going down alone will slow down the mission more than you could ever speed it up by. This is why the best scouts have mastered their ability to survive and multitask while their team is unable to support them. You also need to understand that you are a flex class. Your job is to recognize and manage priorities. By tunnel visioning into a single role or job as scout, you are not taking full advantage of your versatile equipment. Now is also a good time to mention that this guide is mainly focused on modded difficulties, as they require you to embrace your class's speciality, instead of simply being a jack of all trades like you would be in vanilla. Not to say that this guide is not applicable to vanilla hazards. Anything I talk about here will work in all of vanilla and will make you a better scout. If you are interested in delving into modded difficulties, you can join the Practical DRG Discord server. Link in the description. People here are very accepting of players new to modded and will help you regardless of your skill and experience. Also, this video's purpose is to not force anyone to play in a specific way. I am simply making this guide for those of you who are interested in improving as scout players. Now that everyone is on the same page, it's time for me to explain the Nitra economy and talk about pacing. Booyah! In high-level play, there is a term that is often used by players: pacing. As the difficulty is increased, swarm intervals and swarm sizes will grow. This results in more ammo consumption, and the fights will also take longer. Pacing essentially means your mission progress and readiness for the next big swarm. Pacing is directly tied to your Nitra economy. Let's say that you have not found enough Nitra for a resupply and the next swarm hits you. That means that you are falling back on pacing. Good pacing requires for you to bank resupplies in preparation for the next swarm. You also need to be quick in terms of Nitra gathering, so you have time to complete mission objectives as well. Your main job as scout is to maintain the Nitra economy. Because of your great mobility, you can quickly access Nitra veins and feed the team with resupplies. Other classes are better off working together clearing out the current swarm, since they actually possess decent crowd control. Of course, you can chime in time to time in order to take out problem enemies, but mainly you should be focusing on gathering Nitra. Get familiar with swarm intervals. Being aware of when the next big wave will hit is important, because you can determine if you should be looking for another banked resupply, or if you have enough time to work on mission objectives. Luckily, collecting Nitra can be done in a pinch very quickly. You can usually squeeze in an emergency resupply with good movement as the swarm is announced. You can also look for Nitra during actual swarms. This is a dangerous job though, as you can get down far away from your team, leaving them without a scout. Maintaining the Nitra economy is a lot easier when everything is dead, so work together during combat so you can be done quickly and return to mining Nitra. There is also the topic of mining crust. Leaving crust is not inherently dangerous to your Nitra economy, and sometimes having crust form is actually good technique. However, most of the time it's better to just mine the entire vein for its full value, especially if it's quiet and you have time to mine a vein completely. Just don't go after those small specks of 0.1 Nitra, they're not worth it. Also, please don't be that one fucking guy who complains about the crust. There's probably a good reason that someone left the crust. Instead, mine it by yourself, you lazy. Next part of proper mining technique is animation cancelling. This is pretty common and almost everyone is aware of it. Basically, the latter part of your swing animation after the initial hit is purely cosmetic, and you can skip it by releasing the right click. Then you can swing again and repeat the process for slightly faster mining. This is especially valuable on power swings because the initial hit of a power swing is almost instant, and 99% of the animation happens after the hit, meaning that you can pretty much skip the whole animation. There has been a lot of talk about animation cancelling being unnecessary due to how little it actually speeds things up, and the occasional missed cancel can slow you down. I still believe it to be a good skill to start practicing because you will eventually get good enough at it to avoid missing cancels, which ends up working in your favor in the long run. Final mining technique that I like to call hop mining is the act of jumping past the mineral vein and taking a quick hit at it while you fly past the vein for a chunky meat shot. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned that sometimes leaving crust is good technique. If you were to simply do this without jumping, the game will slow you down to walk speed as your pickaxe animation begins. Jumping before you start your swing will maintain your sprint momentum, because the game can only slow you down while you are in contact with the ground. This technique is very useful because you can maintain the Nitra economy while you are focusing on objectives or getting chased by bugs that you don't necessarily want to deal with. The ability to spot ledges or opportunities to create a ledge that you can stand on is an essential skill for any scout. Basically, you can land on some pretty tiny ledges to use them as bootleg platforms in order to mine Nitra that is high up on a wall or a ceiling. Most commonly, you can use Nitra veins themselves as ledges to stand on. While it is nice to have an engineer create platforms for you, there will be many situations where the engineer is currently occupied or you are by yourself, and that is when this technique is very useful to know. This pretty much covers the first rule of mining minerals. Next, I'll explain how to efficiently use your flare gun.
Yeah. Lights up.
The flare gun is probably the most powerful support tool in the game, tied with the gunner's shield. The extra light will always be appreciated, and being able to see your surroundings should in theory make everything easier and more efficient. The secret to lighting up the cave is literally just remembering to use your flare gun. Many scouts, even experienced ones, can have trouble with this, because a stressful situation can tunnel vision you out of your flare gun. You just really need to build up that muscle memory of remembering to use your flares whenever things get really dark. If you know where the majority of the action is going to happen, that is what you should keep lit up. If you are going into an unexplored section of the cave, you should use a couple flares immediately to see what it has in store. This is very important. For example, Doretta breaching into a new cave during an escort mission can be very dangerous depending on your difficulty, which is why it is imperative to light it up as soon as possible. Another common factor to a dark cave is overusing your flare gun, leaving you with no flares for the situation that actually calls for a lit up cave. You don't really have that much ammo to spare, and using 2 flares when you only needed to use 1 is a big resource sink. If the situation calls for more flares, you should spread them out evenly, so that the emanating light can reach a bigger area. A good example is the Omeron room during escort missions. Here you can easily keep the entire arena lit up with just 2 flares spread out to the left and the right. Although you should probably use more flares during Omeran, because of how combat heavy it is. The height of a cave also impacts how far the light from your flares will reach. If you are in an especially tall cave, a flare on the roof will not reach the floor with its light, which essentially wastes a flare, unless you're trying to spot leeches. In tall caves you should look for lower points to stick flares into, like in this clip where I am shooting flares into the natural bridges. When building your flare gun, you should always take the extra magazine size in tier 2. This is because you will always get 1 extra flare from resupplies due to how the game rounds up numbers. You can also animation cancel the flare gun, to speed up the fire rate. Just tap your pickaxe input after firing and you can fire almost immediately afterwards. This pretty much covers the flare gun. Onto the topic of HVTs and combat. Scout's ammo economy is simply put terrible. But at least you make up for it in range and burst damage. This makes you very good at dealing with targets that have fairly low health, deal a lot of damage, and do it at range. There are also ways to build Scout into a swarm clear role, but team composition is heavily praised and utilized in higher difficulties and modded, meaning that you're better off building into what your class is actually good at. If you find yourself focusing too much on crowd control, you will usually burn through resupplies very quickly, often needing to double dip. HVTs are enemies that have the immediate power to shut you down. This consists of most ranged enemies and stationaries, since you have to actively dodge their projectiles instead of simply kiting them. As Scout, your job is to prioritize eliminating these threats as quickly as possible. Just don't go ham on stationaries that are still sleeping. Once aggroed, they will target your team regardless of the distance. Instead, only shoot at stationaries if they have woken up, or if you are 100% sure that you can take them down quickly. If you see or hear an HVT, like a menace or a tryjaw, you need to immediately drop everything that you are doing and take it down. These enemies can snowball you into situations that are very hard to recover from. The newly added scale brambles are especially tough to get rid of for anyone but the Scout, so use your mobility to find the weak points that are hidden behind cover. Some enemies are more HVT than others. In the current sandbox, one of the most dangerous enemies is the Septic Spreader. They are unique because they do not need line of sight to the player in order to cause problems. When there is a spreader on the field obstructed by map geometry, it's the Scout's job to take it out, since he can easily grapple to the spreader's location. Before I talk about specific overclocks, I want to mention that most guns and overclocks can be used in all of vanilla, and in most modded difficulties too. I will only talk about what is currently considered meta, as to keep the video shorter. You can honestly use whatever you want and get away with it if you like, unless you are using the burst fire GK2. One of the current meta builds for Scout that is praised by the high-level community is Thermal Exhaust Feedback Track, or in short, TEF. TEF is strong because it adds fire damage to your shots, which a lot of your main HVTs are weak against. TEF also increases your total damage, provides fire spread for crowds, and has strong burst damage that can be maintained for a long duration. To maximize your efficiency on TEF, you will need to learn a strategy called TEF edging, or edging the track. Because the bonus fire damage is only applied after you're beyond 50% heat, and the bonus only grows stronger the closer you are to overheating, your goal is to edge the overheat mechanic by shooting short bursts and letting the gun cool off a little bit before firing another burst. You don't want the gun to cool down completely, because then you would have to expend more ammo in order to build up damage again. A good build for edging is the one on the screen now. You want to avoid Gen 2 cooling systems, since in actual combat you are usually using your grapple to reposition and dodge enemies, or simply just switching weapons. If you take this upgrade, the track will cool down too fast, which will make you waste ammo building up heat again. In conclusion, TEF is one of the best options for your primary in this current meta. The M1K has been a fan favorite due to its nature as an immediate shutdown to low health HVTs. However, it is best used in a coordinated team where you know that someone else has crowd control covered, because the M1K is not very ammo efficient in that department, unless you specifically build it for that role, but that also means that you lose out on the main strength of the M1K. Use the M1K if you are in a cryo comp with someone else taking care of grunts. I won't really talk about the GK2 because even after its buffs, it is still overshadowed by Scout's other options, the only meta being Ice. Unfortunately, Ice is still pretty weak in comparison to TEF or even the base M1K. Scout's two secondaries, the boomstick and the crossbow, fill different roles, and you can swap between them depending on what you're looking for. I am of the firm belief that the boomstick is the most balanced gun in the game. It needs no buffs, nerfs, it's simply perfectly balanced. The base gun without an overclock is already very strong and fills the role of a quick burst damage or a crowd control option. You should always use the fire upgrade for the boomstick, because once again, fire is good for HVTs. If you have pheromone grenades equipped, you can essentially clear out an entire room of bugs with nothing but the boomstick blow-through rounds and fire spread. The crossbow is mainly used for its cryobolt overclock. I don't personally have a lot of experience with the crossbow because I always use the boomstick instead, but the benefit of cryo is dealing with stationaries and high health targets. 3 bolts is enough to freeze a breeder. 1 bolt will freeze stationaries and prevent Nexi from spawning swarmers on death. You can also combine cryo with conductive thermals on rack, which will reduce the amount of bolts needed to freeze high health targets. Cryobolt also works as a great way to counter swarmers, because freezing a swarmer immediately kills it. If you are holding down and find swarmers surrounding you, you can quickly shoot a cryobolt onto the ground and stay near it. The AoE radius of cryo will kill any swarmers that get too close. You can also shoot cryobolts into swarmer tunnels, and they will spawn kill all of the swarmers that emerge. I'll quickly leave a small trick that helps you deal with swarmers without cryobolt. You can pretty easily kill swarmers with your pickaxe. By abusing animation cancelling, you can stay in motion and avoid the massive slowdown effect of hitting a bug with a pickaxe swing. One swing can usually take down a couple swarmers if they're close enough to each other. And if you are getting swarmed by multiple, you can slowly kite them to spread them apart for easy pickings. Now on to a more controversial overclock. Conductive Thermals DRAC, or CT. This overclock can put out some insane damage during Dreadnought missions, when you are coordinated with your team and have specifically built your weapons around the overclock. What it does is make enemies more vulnerable to elemental effects, meaning that they take more damage from elemental effects and also light up or freeze faster. Each projectile from CT will apply a small increase to the target's vulnerability. Currently, there is a bug that makes Plasma Splash apply this effect twice. It will most likely be patched out in the future though. A strong benefit of CT is that you can reach a 1 cryo grenade breakpoint for breeders. While CT has its own niche, it doesn't come without a downside. CT very heavily leans into taking out high health targets, but you lose out on the ability to quickly deal with low health targets. DRAC's base damage output is not very good, and it ends up being even worse if you have Plasma Splash equipped, since your critical hits will be dealing significantly less damage. There's been a lot of talk about this overclock needing to be nerfed, and the developers have considered it during their streams. Next, I will explain how to use your grenades efficiently. Scout's 3 grenades are probably the strongest grenades in the entire game. IFGs are great for holds and high health targets. Cryos are just a strong answer to any situation. and pheromones are broken to the point of people choosing not to use them in missions, due to how much they trivialize combat. In short, your grenades are mainly for controlling tough situations, without directly killing the bugs with your grenade. IFGs and cryos are quite easy to understand. Throw them at a group of enemies that are packed tightly and reap the rewards. A good trick with IFGs is to get inside of a tunnel and throw an IFG inside the tunnel to make sure that every enemy will pass through it, giving you all of the value of the damage buff. Cryo grenades are basically a free get out of jail card. I have already explained how these can take out breeders. Usually you want to use a cryo grenade to take out a swarm of Mactera, freeze a large group of Glyphids for the damage buff of cryo, or to buy yourself time when getting swarmed. Pheromones, on the other hand, work differently. Their main purpose is to calm situations down. Pheromones can also be used for crowd control by piling enemies together to easily abuse AoE crowd control options. You can use pheromones to disable swarms for prolonged periods of time, by reapplying the effect after every 15 seconds. You can essentially activate peaceful mode for a whole minute with all 4 of your grenades. The reason pheromones are so strong is because the effect only gets stronger the more enemies you can tag with it. Once a bug gets the effect, they will aggro a certain amount of enemies to their presence. For the best result, you would want to pheromone a larger group of bugs, because this will draw more aggro since more bugs are under the effect. Split Centro has made a more informative video on the pheromone grenades and pheromone bolts from the crossbow. I recommend watching it if you want to know more about the effect, because it is quite complicated. And now we finally get to the topic of special powder. If you watch my videos, you already know how I feel about this overclock. Simply said, special powder has an infinite skill ceiling. It can be applied to almost any situation and be used to gain an advantage. You can kite bugs and projectiles with it. You can travel very long distances with it. You can abuse heavy object tech with it. You can avoid fall damage with it. All this while still having a strong secondary weapon for burst damage. The only limiting factor being your experience and accuracy of landing a powder shot. Some people might say that special powder is unnecessary due to Scout already possessing a grappling hook for movement. I tend to disagree because Scout's entire role is built on the fact that he can get to places very quickly. If you want to become a master of Spowder, I highly recommend increasing your in-game field of view beyond the normal cap of 120. This is because Spowder benefits from a larger field of view due to the fact that you are never directly facing the direction that you want to fly towards. Also, I would recommend only taking 1 ammo upgrade instead of 2. Often people choose both ammo upgrades because they think that by choosing special powder, the boomstick's ammo economy will suffer. Many players will find themselves powdering way too often, usually a result of improper angling. The biggest mistake is shooting directly downwards when you should aim more horizontally in most cases. Another limiting factor to Spowder is not keeping up with the Nitra economy. You can build into a medic role if you combine Spowder with field medic. When there is a situation where you need to revive someone, you can kite enemies far away from the downed player and quickly close the distance for a revive with Spowder. This usually gives you enough time to get a revive. Remember that the enemies who are attacking a downed player will not attack you directly, even if you are standing right next to them. However, Praetorians can still hit you during a revive, since their attacks are AoE. If there is a Praetorian on a downed teammate, you can either kill it, freeze it with a cryo, or pheromone another bug to draw its aggro. If you have chosen to start your journey as a special powder Gigachad, you should learn how to perform heavy object tech with it. The most useful heavy tech is a single-shot vertical throw. This can save you a lot of trouble if Minimule legs or Aquarks end up at the bottom of a pit. By throwing a heavy object directly above you at full charge, you can quickly shoot at the ground and juggle the object while maintaining the vertical speed of your Spowder shot. You may also notice that you can't hold the object while performing this trick. Reason being that the game has a mechanic where heavy objects will be forced out of your hands if you exceed a certain vertical velocity. In order to get around this mechanic, you must continuously keep sending interact inputs to re-grab the object as soon as it falls down from your hands. You can either spam your interact key or bind interact to the scroll wheel. If you want to move heavy objects horizontally with Spouter, you should practice the following technique. 1. Throw the object above you at half charge. 2. Walk slightly forward. 3. Special powder and hold interact. Depending on the angle you aim your Spouter, you may or may not need to send extra inputs after the initial grab, in case you are not breaking the vertical velocity cap. One strategy that I have personally started to focus on is combat spoutering. Combat spoutering means that you are actively using your Spouter to kite enemies while also trying to hit enemies with the Spouter shot that you are trying to kite them with. This way you can get both movement and damage values for your shot, instead of just one. If you are trying to break fall damage with Spouter, there is usually an opportunity to do it while also hitting an enemy with the shot. There is also the topic of bunny hopping combined with Spouter. This is pretty controversial because it is only fully reliable with the help of macros. If you want to learn more about bunny hopping, I have a video on it, link in the description. In the end, there isn't really too much to say on how to use Spouter correctly. It really all comes down to understanding how the knockback interacts with your current momentum. Mastering Spouter is a long journey, and it takes time and practice to get good at. Next, I will talk about the single most important skill of any scout, the ability to survive alone. First up, build options for survivability. Always take Iron Will, and maybe consider taking heightened senses too. These allow you to recover from the occasional screw-up when you would otherwise be punished heavily for your actions. If you only want to use Iron Will, Field Medic is an excellent option for a second perk. Born Ready and Resupplier should be chosen by default. Third passive perk can be anything. I highly recommend Sweet Tooth. On armor, you should have Breathing Room chosen to prevent death looping. This combines well with Resupplier. Your grappling hook can be built in multiple ways. The most important choice you have to make is in the third column. HVES allows you for a snappier and more reactive playstyle, while OW relies on pure speed. For higher difficulties, I recommend HVES, especially if you are playing as client, as to prevent double grapples from ruining your day. Previously, I have been a huge fan of OW for its speed properties, but recently I have turned more towards HVES because the faster hook time is invaluable for higher difficulties, since you need to constantly make quick reactionary decisions based on what enemies are around you. OW struggles with these quick reactions due to the longer hook time, meaning that you might not be able to dodge that Spitballer or Barrage projectile in time. Of course, both options have their strengths, and you could argue for both. Pick whichever you enjoy the most. With your build covered, it's time to focus on how to stay alive in an actual mission. Rule number 1 of survival: keep moving and reposition often. Having bad movement during combat is usually the cause of people not improving as players. Whatever you do, never stop moving while being chased by bugs unless you are partaking in a hold with your fellow dwarves, or you have enough distance between yourself and the bugs. Distance is the key to movement. Always seek out a path that leaves you with the most room between yourself and the enemies. Because of the hectic nature of higher difficulties, positioning for a scout is a much more mobile act than simply staying in one spot. You are always forced to keep moving by the endless onslaught of fast bugs, meaning that quick decision making is the core of survivability. Usually you want to move along cover at all times in order to block projectiles. This way you can slowly poke away at the crowd of HVTs while they are still charging their attacks. Staying in an open cave is very dangerous, as there are more directions enemies can collapse on you, and stationaries will have a line of sight to you. Always try to fight enemies in a way that forces them into a specific location, so you are not being surrounded. In case you decide that it is time to clear some enemies, you can get inside a tunnel, which will force the enemies to come through only a single direction. This way you have much easier time taking them down. If you have to stay in an open cave while getting swarmed, at least you have your grappling hook to quickly fix mistakes and reposition. Really, there isn't an area that you cannot reach. Your grappling hook can pretty much kite all ground enemies, since you are faster than them. There is a strategy called snap grappling. A snap grapple is a reaction during a fight where you quickly grapple in order to reposition. I often use snap grapples to dodge spitballers that are nearby. Their projectiles can be dodged without a grapple if they are far enough away from you, but in close quarters they will hit you unless you have some way to increase your speed. If your HP starts to get low, take advantage of red sugar instead of healing through a resupply, unless you are low on ammo. This is why I use Sweet Tooth. The extra health is good enough on its own, but you also get a pretty decent speed boost for quite a long time. You can also grapple on top of red sugar crystals that are sticking out of the wall, wait a few seconds to let your grapple recharge, and then mine the sugar and break fall damage with your grapple. Keeping your HP topped off with red sugar is very important. This way you can avoid some attacks straight up one-tapping you, and usually this scout is the only class that can reach sugar that is fairly high up in the ceiling. This is also where Spouter comes in handy. Sometimes sugar literally generates into the roof, and grappling to it will mean that your grapple doesn't have enough time to recharge, so you end up taking fall damage. With Spouter you can avoid this, and suddenly the roof sugar is an option. And with this we are nearing the end of the video. First of all, I would like to give a special thanks to the community at PDRG, and especially OGB for reviewing some of my gameplay and giving me feedback. A lot of the things that I had originally planned for this video were scrapped. Luckily, I had other people review my ideas and point out mistakes. There are probably still some things that I might have missed or got wrong, so if you could point out some of them in the comments, that would be very helpful. Putting together videos of this scale takes a lot of time and commitment. This video in particular has been in the works for a better part of a month. If you did watch through the entire video, you have my thanks. Anyways, I think I'll end the video.